The words "you are all fired," the sound struck like a hammer blow, shattering the heavy silence of first class. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. Half-filled wine glasses trembled in passengers' hands. Flight attendants stood frozen, eyes wide in disbelief at what they had just heard. And at the center of that storm, Adrian Cole, a black man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, sat upright, his gaze cold, yet burning with a fire no one could extinguish. None of them knew that those words would rip apart the glamorous facade of the airline industry. But before the truth was revealed, we must turn back to understand why a single flight became a courtroom where power overturned the game. Adrian Cole was not born with a silver spoon. He grew up in South Chicago, where the soundtrack was police sirens, and the night always felt colder than winter. His mother, Ruth Cole, a single black woman, worked 3 jobs: cleaning offices by day, serving in a diner by evening, and rushing to the factory for the night shift. Her hands were calloused, her eyes weary, but her words glowed brighter than any lamp in their run-down apartment. "Adrian, your mind is your greatest asset. People can take your house, your money, your food, but no one can steal your knowledge." Every night, she repeated it like a lullaby, planting in her son the belief that poverty was only a stop, not a destiny. At 10 years old, Adrian was already different from the other kids in his neighborhood. Instead of basketball or street fights on the cracked concrete courts, he dug through dumpsters, searching for discarded computer parts. Late at night, under the dim yellow bulb, his small hands unscrewed bolts, pieced together circuits. While his friends still wrestled with multiplication tables, Adrian had taught himself 3 programming languages. But genius alone could not erase the scornful looks of society. When he received a full scholarship to MIT, Adrian thought a new door had opened. Yet in his very first week, reality struck inside a computer science class. A professor with gray hair and a frosty tone looked at his sophisticated algorithm and squinted. "You did this yourself? Or did someone help you?" The room went silent. Eyes turned toward Adrian, not with admiration, but with suspicion. In that moment he understood. Brilliance was his only weapon for survival. From then on, every insult became fuel, every doubt became an engine. 4 years later, Adrian stood at commencement as valedictorian of both computer science and business administration. His MIT classmates poured into Google, Microsoft, Apple, the giants with their gilded doors wide open. Adrian returned to his mother's old garage. With just $500, he built Aegis Labs, marked with the symbol of a phoenix rising from ashes. Those early days reeked of instant noodles mixed with the burnt smell of circuit boards. But in that freezing garage, he created Phoenix Shield, a small, cheap security software so effective that even small businesses were stunned. Adrian knocked on doors, faced rejection hundreds of times, yet persevered. Word spread of a young black man selling software better than million-dollar products. 3 years later, Aegis left the garage. In 5 years, it had 50 employees. By year 10, Aegis went public. Wall Street was stunned. At just 30, Adrian Cole became the youngest black billionaire in America's tech history. Yet power never made him forget his mother's words. Aegis's culture was built on one foundation: respect. Here, Adrian often told new hires, the only color that matters is the color of ideas. Strangely enough, despite his wealth, he refused to buy a private jet. The day I stop flying with regular people is the day I lose touch with my customers. For him, every flight was a reminder never to forget where he came from. Then came that Thursday morning, when everything changed. Inside Aegis's towering glass headquarters, Adrian and his board had just sealed a historic $4.2 billion contract with the government. A deal that elevated the company, proving that black leadership was not just part of the tech game, but capable of leading it. "This isn't just a contract," said Naomi Price, his young COO. "This is a declaration." Adrian nodded, a rare smile flickering. "Then let's go. New York is waiting." That afternoon, in the crowded halls of O'Hare Airport, Adrian and his team headed toward Gate B-23. He wore a navy Tom Ford suit, phone in hand displaying his boarding pass. People glanced at him, some with respect, many with surprise. A man like him, in first class? Stepping into the jet bridge, Adrian felt the shift in the air. The half smiles, the quick glances long enough to say what no one dared to voice. And when he placed his leather briefcase beneath seat 2A, the spot he had chosen carefully to work and to gaze out the window, it had only just begun. They saw a black man sitting in first class. What they did not know was that he was the one who held the power to decide the airline's fate. The first-class cabin glowed with warm golden light, but the air had turned cold the moment Adrian sat down in seat 2A. He was used to it, the fleeting glances, the half-smiles of forced courtesy, or the strange silence that followed when a black man in a fine suit entered a space long considered the territory of wealthy white elites. The seat embraced his back, spacious and comfortable, built for quiet. Adrian powered up his tablet, ready to review the terms of the $4.2 billion contract. But then a voice rose, not a greeting, but an empty command. "Water." Looking up, he saw Carly Benson, a blonde flight attendant, her face carefully made up, but her eyes cold as steel. For the white passengers behind him, she poured champagne warmly, calling each one by name like an old friend. For Adrian, she set down a plastic cup of water without a word. He gave a faint smile, no reaction outwardly, though inside a bitter familiarity stirred. This was no mistake. It was a pattern set long ago. He had learned to distinguish between tired service and deliberate contempt, and this, clearly, was the latter. A loud voice rose from the back of the cabin. "That's my seat, 2A, same as every week for 6 years." The man's tone was raspy, yet arrogant, loud enough for everyone to hear. Passengers stepped aside as a heavy figure in a wrinkled, expensive suit appeared. Gregory Langford, a notorious real estate tycoon, well known in politics and elite clubs. Carly quickly leaned in to greet him, her tone softer, deferential. "Of course, Mr. Langford. I'll take care of it." Adrian remained still, sitting upright, his feet pressing against the carpeted floor as he fought to stay calm. On his tablet screen, the $1 billion contract remained open, yet here, in this space, his worth had been reduced to nothing. Langford stopped beside seat 2A and glared. "Hey, buddy, that's my seat. Everyone knows it. You should move." Adrian looked up, his voice steady, slow, but firm. "I booked this seat yesterday. Here's my boarding pass." He held up his phone, proof in plain sight. But Carly glanced at it as though it were meaningless. "There may have been a system error. We'll find you another seat," she said, her voice quiet but decisive. "Which seat?" Adrian asked. "Row 17. The middle, 17B. The moment rang out like a crack through glass. From first class, the symbol of privilege and power, down to the cramped middle seat of economy, it was a public demotion, exposing every hidden bias behind the smiles and uniforms. Adrian did not protest immediately. He looked at Carly, then at Langford, then at the eyes surrounding him. Some passengers looked away, others discreetly raised their phones to record, and a few even smiled with satisfaction. Captain Edward Hayes, tall and sharply uniformed, stepped out of the cockpit alongside Owen Clark, the first officer, his gaze sharp and appraising. They moved straight toward seat 2A, as though the trial was ready, and Adrian was already the accused. "What seems to be the problem?" Hayes asked dryly. "This man is in the wrong seat," Carly replied, pointing at Adrian. Adrian calmly raised his boarding pass again. "I am in the right seat. Here is the proof." But Hayes crossed his arms, cold and unmoved. "We have the right to reassign seating. You will have to move." A wave of anger surged inside Adrian's chest, but he held it back. He knew that as a black man, one wrong reaction, even for a second, could brand him a threat. And he carried not just his own dignity, but the future of thousands of Aegis employees and the billion-dollar deal awaiting him the next day. He drew a deep breath, then spoke carefully. "Before you force me out of this seat, at least show me proof that Mr. Langford has a ticket for 2A. Langford laughed, a low, arrogant rumble. "I don't need a ticket. This seat has always been mine for 6 years. Everyone here knows it." The word sliced the air, a knife dividing two worlds, the world of invisible privilege and the world of those who must always prove they belong. Adrian looked straight into Langford's eyes, then at Carly, Hayes, and Clark. For a few seconds, he no longer saw the glamorous cabin. He saw history itself, a long cycle of exclusion and contempt, repeating yet again, this time in the shape of seat 2A. The cabin was silent, every breath held. Then Hayes spoke, voice hard as iron. "You have two choices. Move to 17A or be escorted off this flight by security." Adrian sat still. Inside, his heart pounded, but his eyes never shifted. Each second weighed 1,000 pounds. Finally, he rose slowly. His Tom Ford suit rippled as he gathered his tablet and small case. He looked around first class, where silence now served as both judgment and complicity. His voice rang out, deep and clear. "I leave this seat under protest." Then he turned, walking down the narrow aisle. Each step cut into his pride, but each step also lit a flame. A flame no one in that cabin realized was about to spread, consuming the careers and reputations of those who had savored his humiliation. Adrian sat down in the cramped middle seat of 17B, clutching his case between his knees. To his left, a heavy man spilled into his space. To his right, a weary woman sighed in irritation. The smell of plastic seats and recycled air pressed in around him. But in Adrian's eyes, a spark ignited. They thought he was just another anonymous black passenger. The truth was, he held the power to decide the fate of the entire airline. Seat 17B was so cramped that Adrian Cole's shoulders were nearly wedged between two strangers. The man on his left snored loudly, hot breath spilling over. The woman on his right wore headphones, her body language dripping with irritation, as if his presence alone had made the flight inconvenient. Each passing second pressed humiliation into Adrian's chest like heavy stones. He sat still, eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him, where a meaningless little screen flickered with safety instructions. But in his mind, a storm raged. He heard the pounding of his own heart. They had just turned him into someone invisible. But he would turn this moment into an earthquake. The soft rattle of the service cart broke through his thoughts. A young flight attendant approached. Her curly hair was neatly tied back. Her nameplate read, Kiara Ellis. Unlike Carly Benson, Kiara's eyes held warmth, though shadowed by unease, as if she was fighting herself. "Would you like anything, sir?" she asked softly, her voice gentle, respectful. Adrian forced a faint smile. "Just water." Kiara poured the water and placed a napkin beside it. But as she leaned down, her hand slipped just slightly, leaving behind a tiny line of hurried handwriting. "What they did to you, this isn't the first time." Adrian froze for a heartbeat. He looked up and caught her determined gaze beneath the mask of professional composure. She turned away immediately, but in that fleeting moment, a spark of hope lit inside him. 10 minutes later, when the cart returned, Kiara discreetly placed a folded note on his tray while pretending to clear the plastic cup. Adrian kept a neutral face, waiting until she was gone before opening it. Inside, the shaky words read, "This crew, Hayes, Benson, Clark, has a history of racism. They've forced black passengers out of first class before, to give seats to Langford and his friends. We call it keeping the right image. I have proof. If you want it, meet me after the flight." Adrian read it again and again. His body was taut, like a string pulled to breaking, but his heartbeat slowed. Anger faded, replaced by cold focus. Proof, an ally. The chain had revealed a link. He quietly switched his phone to offline messaging and sent a quick note to Naomi Price, his COO sitting a few rows ahead in first class. "Check ownership of Skyspan Airlines. Urgent." Within minutes, the reply came. "Horizon Holdings owns 67%. Cole Equity Partners, your fund, holds 28% of Horizon, which means you are the major stakeholder." Adrian closed his eyes, a faint smile flickering. The board had shifted. Only hours earlier, they had treated him as an anonymous passenger to be forced from seat 2A. Now he realized he held the leverage to decide the airline's fate. The plane surged forward toward New York, cutting through gray clouds. But for Adrian, this was no ordinary flight. This was a tribunal in the sky, where justice would not arrive instantly, but inevitably. He glanced at Kiara as she quietly passed by. In that unnoticed moment, he whispered, "Thank you. Wait for me at arrivals. Tonight, we'll talk." Kiara gave the slightest nod, her eyes flashing before she walked on, as if nothing had happened. In first class, Gregory Langford raised his champagne, laughing loudly with the crew. The passengers around him pretended not to hear, but their eyes betrayed them. They were used to this scene. A rich man shamelessly claiming a seat. A black man pushed aside. A crew that turned away. Meanwhile, in seat 17B, Adrian opened his digital notebook and began recording every detail. The names of the attendants, the words they had spoken, the differences in service, the deference shown to Langford. He wasn't just remembering for personal revenge. He was building a case, detail by detail, that would force the entire system to pay. A teenage girl seated behind him lightly tapped his shoulder and whispered, "Sir, what just happened? I saw it on TikTok already. People are live streaming." Adrian tilted his head slightly. Yes, a few passengers had raised their phones during the confrontation. That video was already racing beyond the confines of the cabin. He drew a long breath, his eyes calm and dangerously steady. They thought he was just a passenger, but they had created a media storm, and he was the eye of it. In that moment, Adrian saw the contrast clearly. Up front, Carly Benson smiled brightly as she served caviar to Langford. Here, he clutched his briefcase between strangers, humiliated. But in the narrow shadows, he swore they would not escape. Not Langford, not Hayes, Carly, or Clark. Not even the system that had enabled this contempt. The plane trembled gently. Outside, clouds swirled like waves. Inside Adrian, a plan was taking shape, sharp, ruthless, and just. He leaned back and closed his eyes. From the depths of memory, he heard his mother's voice. "Your mind is your greatest asset." And this time, he knew that mind would not only save him, it would force an empire to its knees. The Boeing 737 dipped gently as it began its descent. Through the narrow window of seat 17B, streaks of yellow lights blurred in the rainy New York afternoon. Captain Edward Hayes's voice came smoothly over the intercom, as if nothing had happened just hours before. "Welcome to LaGuardia. The current temperature is 60.2 degrees with light rain. Thank you for choosing Skyspan Airlines." To Adrian Cole, those words dripped with irony. Thank you, while they had just dragged him out of first class like an anonymous intruder. The cabin came alive again. Passengers stood, jostling for luggage. Adrian stayed seated, eyes locked on the front rows of first class. He saw Langford rise leisurely, adjusting the gold watch on his wrist, laughing with Hayes and Carly as if they were old friends. "Another smooth flight, Gregory," Hayes said, his voice pitched just loud enough for Adrian to hear. Langford chuckled. "Of course. Seat 2A is always mine. People like him need to know their place." Adrian's blood boiled, but his face remained cold. Not now. Not yet. He waited until the crowd thinned before rising, suitcase in hand. Carly avoided his eyes. Clark kept his head down. Hayes squinted stiffly. Adrian stopped at the cockpit door, slid a business card toward the captain. "Adrian Cole, CEO of Aegis Labs." Hayes flinched, eyes widening before forcing a weak smile. Adrian tilted his head, his voice calm but sharp. "Next time, be careful when you decide who deserves to sit where." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked into the jet bridge. Behind him, The hushed panic of the crew buzzed like a hive. Outside gate B23, damp air hit his face. Rain splattered against the terminal's glass walls. Naomi Price was waiting, her eyes burning with restrained fury. "Adrian, I heard everything. Some passengers uploaded the video. It's already spreading online." He nodded, voice low. "Good. Let them feed the fire." At that moment, two Skyspan managers rushed forward. Gerald Whitman, the overweight station manager, nearly breathless, and Sophie Daniels, young and brisk, customer relations. "Mr. Cole, please wait," Gerald puffed. "We deeply regret the incident. It was surely just a misunderstanding. Skyspan is committed to serving all customers equally." Adrian narrowed his eyes. His tone sounded memorized, hollow. He cut him off. "A misunderstanding? You publicly humiliated me in front of hundreds of people, and you call that a misunderstanding?" Sophie jumped in with a forced smile. "We're prepared to offer compensation, free vouchers, an upgrade, or cash. Please give us a chance." "No," Adrian said flatly. "I don't need tickets or meaningless payouts. I need justice, and justice does not wear this blue uniform." Gerald stammered. "Please, let us resolve this internally, privately." Adrian stepped closer, his voice a cold blade. "From this moment on, everything goes through official channels. My lawyer will contact you. I have nothing more to say here." He turned away. Naomi fell into step beside him. Behind them, Gerald and Sophie traded frantic whispers like people who had tried to hold sand only to watch it slip through their fingers. Outside the terminal, rain poured harder. A line of black limousines waited. Jordan Vance, head of Aegis Security, opened the door. His face was tense. "I saw Langford on the phone right after landing. He knows who you are." Adrian slid into the leather seat, watching raindrops race across the glass. "Good. Let him spend the night afraid." On the way to the hotel, his phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from Chief Counsel Sofia Alvarez lit the screen. "Confirmed. Aegis, through Cole Equity, holds 28% of Horizon Holdings, parent company of Skyspan. Found 18 official complaints against Crew Hayes, Benson, Clark in the last 2 years, all ignored. Witnesses ready to meet tonight." Adrian sat silent, his fingers tapping lightly on the suitcase. The plan in his mind sharpened with each beat of his heart. That evening, in a small cafe near the arrivals hall, Kyara Ellis appeared. Rain dampened her shoulders, but her eyes burned steady. "Mr. Cole," she whispered, "I have the files, group messages, hidden emails, recordings. They call first class the white zone. I couldn't take it anymore. But I'm afraid, if I speak out alone, I'll lose my job." Adrian placed his hand on the folder she slid across, his gaze both warm and unyielding. "You are not alone. From now on, they're the ones who should be afraid." Outside, rain pounded on. But inside Adrian Cole, a greater storm was forming. The crew thought they had won when they pushed him to seat 17B. Langford believed privilege could buy silence. Management hoped a few vouchers would bury the scandal. None of them realized that the man they had dismissed was their own largest shareholder. And tomorrow, the board would flip. Adrian leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Rainfall merged with the voice of his mother, echoing from memory. "Your mind is your greatest asset. Know when to endure, and when to strike. Adrian smiled faintly. Tomorrow would be the moment to strike. The Waldorf Manhattan Hotel, where Aegis Labs had reserved suites for its leadership team, glowed against the rainy night like fireworks in the sky. But inside the spacious top-floor suite, the atmosphere was heavy, more like a war room than a retreat. Adrian Cole stood at the center, jacket removed, shirt sleeves rolled, tie loosened. Around him, his closest allies, Naomi Price, Jordan Vance, Sofia Alvarez, moved with the urgency of a military operation. Laptops glared, phones rang non-stop, papers sprawled across the polished wooden table. "We are not responding to one flight," Adrian said, his voice hard as steel. "We are responding to an entire system, and by tomorrow morning, Skyspan will understand what consequences truly mean." Sofia Alvarez, the chief counsel, looked up from her screen, her tone icy. "We have 3 angles of attack. First, as a major shareholder of Horizon Holdings, Skyspan's parent company, you have the authority to call an emergency board meeting. Second, the evidence of discrimination, at least 18 formal complaints buried. Third, federal law and DOT regulations. This could become a full-scale civil rights lawsuit if necessary." Naomi cut in, her eyes sharp. "I just got off the call with PR. The video of you being forced from seat 2A has already passed 3 million views. The hashtag #SkySpanRacism is climbing to the top of Twitter. The media has the story. Public outrage is spreading," Jordan added firmly. "On security, I've verified the files Kiara Ellis provided. The group messages between Hayes, Benson, and Clark are real. They call first class the white zone. And Langford is not just a regular passenger. He has close ties with members of Skyspan's leadership." The room fell into tense silence. Adrian nodded slowly, scanning each face. His voice was low but resonant. "Tomorrow, we don't walk in as victims. We walk in as owners. I want every piece of evidence laid out so clearly they cannot deny it. We are not demanding an apology. We are demanding change." Sophia pressed her lips together. "I'll draft the emergency board meeting notice tonight. By law, with your stake, they cannot refuse." Naomi said, "PR will hold silence until noon tomorrow. Let them panic overnight. When the outrage peaks, we release the statement. By then, Skyspan will have no way back." Jordan nodded sharply. "I'll coordinate with Kiara and the 2 employees she mentioned. They're ready to testify." Adrian stepped out onto the balcony, where Manhattan rain lashed relentlessly. The sky was heavy gray, but the city below blazed with light. In that moment, he remembered 20 years earlier. A night in their tiny South Chicago apartment, his mother gone to her night shift, leaving a note scrawled on scrap paper. "Son, stand firm. Don't let anyone define your worth but yourself." Now, standing amid a storm of media and law, Adrian understood. This moment was not just for him. It was for every passenger ever pushed aside, ever disrespected, ever stripped of the seat they paid for. He drew a deep breath, turned back into the room, his voice ringing. "Tomorrow, they will see. Seat 2A is not just a seat. It will be a symbol." Past midnight, the room still glowed. Reports rolled in without pause. Sophia Cross checked shareholder statutes. Naomi tracked each spike on social media. Jordan listened intently as Kiara Ellis recounted past incidents, writing every detail. "What exactly did Captain Hayes say before takeoff?" Jordan asked. Kiara glanced at Adrian, then answered. "He said, 'Keep the white zone clean. Don't let the wrong people sit there.' I have the recording." Sophia's eyes lit up. That's the nail in the coffin. There is no denying it now. Nearly 2 a.m, Adrian finally leaned back on the sofa, eyes half closed. But in his mind, the pieces were falling into place as a complete plan. He saw it clearly. Skyspan's board gathered around their long wooden table, faces drained as evidence was laid bare. He saw Langford, once smirking arrogantly in seat 2A, trembling before justice, and he saw millions of people outside, those who had once suffered ill silence, finding new hope in this story. Before slipping into a restless sleep, Adrian sent one final message to the legal team. "Prepare scenario 2. If they refuse, we sue and go public. No compromise." He set his phone down. Rain still poured outside, but inside him a storm raged even fiercer, and by morning it would sweep away the false mask Skyspan had worn for far too long. New York greeted Adrian Cole with a heavy grey sky, rain still pooling on the sidewalks, reflecting neon lights. The headquarters of Skyspan Airlines rose over 7th Avenue like a glass fortress, its mirrored surface catching the relentless stream of traffic below. For many, it was a symbol of American aviation power. For Adrian, today it was nothing more than a castle built on sand. He stepped out of the black limousine, tall and composed in a charcoal suit perfectly cut to his frame. At his side walked Naomi Price, sharp in a black business dress, Sophia Alvarez clutching her laptop like a weapon, and Jordan Vance with the vigilant gaze of a soldier. Behind them, 2 young attorneys carried thick case files. Security guards in the lobby immediately took notice. One recognized Adrian, glanced at his colleague, and whispered, "That's him, the first-class passenger from yesterday." Inside, the grand hall stretched wide, high ceilings glittering with crystal chandeliers. A receptionist approached, trying to keep her professionalism, though her hand trembled as she offered a guest pass. "We've been informed, sir. The board is waiting for you on the 42nd floor. Please take the executive elevator." Adrian nodded silently and strode forward, his leather shoes striking the marble floor in a rhythm that echoed like war drums before battle. The elevator shot upward, leaving 41 floors behind in seconds. Naomi leaned in and whispered, "They're nervous. The news spread overnight. Skyspan's stock opened down 5%. Adrian allowed himself a faint smile. "Good. Let them feel what real pressure looks like." The elevator chimed. The doors slid open onto a red-carpeted hall lined with glossy images of Skyspan planes and staged photos of smiling, diverse passengers. A bitter irony. The massive wooden doors opened. Inside the boardroom stretched long, a polished oak table surrounded by 15 high-backed chairs. At the head sat Richard Halloway, Skyspan's CEO, silver-haired, sun-weathered, his smile forced. Around him sat directors with faces ranging from uneasy to hostile to smug, and at the corner, Adrian recognized a familiar figure. Gregory Langford, draped in a dark blue suit, his face pale, but still clinging to arrogance. "Mr. Cole," Halloway stood, extending his hand. "On behalf of Skyspan, I apologize for the unfortunate incident yesterday. I assure you, it does not reflect the values or commitments of our company." Adrian shook briefly, eyes cold. "Good. Then let us begin." He and his team took their seats. Sophia opened her laptop, the large screen filling with dense data. The sharp clatter of keys broke the silence. Adrian wasted no time. "We all know why I am here. Yesterday was not an incident. It was the inevitable result of a culture embedded in this company: racism, indulgence of privilege, and contempt for your customers. And I have proof." The room rippled with unease. A grey-haired director tried to protest. "Mr. Cole, we have yet to see any proof." Sophia pressed a key. The speakers filled the room with the recorded voice of Captain Hayes. "Keep the white zone clean. Don't let the wrong people sit there." Murmurs surged around the table. Some board members exhaled sharply, faces draining of color. Adrian pressed on, his tone unyielding. 18 formal complaints, all buried. Skyspan leadership knew and chose to ignore, and you allowed Langford and his associates to take whatever seats they pleased, against federal law and the rights of paying customers. Langford's face flushed crimson. "Outrageous." "Aye." Adrian turned on him, eyes like steel. "You don't need to speak. I have your emails with the head of HR. You insisted Hayes, Benson, and Clark remain on the crew because they understood the right standard of passengers. What standard, Mr. Langford? White?" Langford faltered, slamming his fist on the table but choking on his words. The air thickened. Richard Halloway forced another weak smile, his voice lowering. "Mr. Cole, we are truly regretful. The crew has already been suspended. Please, give us time." Adrian cut him off, each word sharp. "No, I am not here for promises. I am here as a major shareholder, representing 28% of Horizon Holdings. I demand a comprehensive reform plan. Immediately." All eyes turned to Halloway. The lone black director, Diane Brooks, tapped her fingers on the table, her eyes steady. "I agree. We cannot deny this any longer." Adrian rose and walked toward the window, looking down at the pulse of Manhattan, traffic flowing like veins through the city. His voice resonated through the boardroom. Seat 2A is not just a seat. It is the measure of how you value human dignity. Yesterday, I was treated as if I did not belong. Today, I remind you, I am your shareholder. I hold the power over Skyspan's future. He turned, his eyes blazing. And that future will have no room or contempt. The room grew heavy. Some directors lowered their gaze. Langford's lips tightened, his face burning red. Richard Halloway wiped sweat from his brow, fully aware the balance of power had shifted. Adrian returned to his seat, his voice steady but commanding. "Now, let us discuss the changes. If not, I will release every piece of evidence to the press within the hour." The boardroom on the 42nd floor felt suffocating. Outside, Manhattan still gleamed, but inside the harsh white lights seemed intent on exposing every bead of sweat on the foreheads of Skyspan's directors. Adrian Cole sat tall, his gaze cold. Before him lay a chessboard of power, and every piece was already exposed. "We cannot allow him to threaten us like this," said Edward Mallory, a grey-haired, white director, slamming his hand on the table. "Skyspan is a national airline. One man cannot dictate the rules to us." Sophia Alvarez glanced at Adrian, then opened her laptop, projecting onto the screen a series of documents: internal emails, complaint reports, buried evidence. "Mr. Mallory, this is not a threat. This is data. Do you want me to read this line from the head of HR? Langford is a close family friend. Keep the Hayes crew. They know how to manage first class." The room fell silent. Langford shifted uneasily in his seat, his face pale, sweat dotting his forehead. Patricia Lynn, another director, spoke hesitantly. "I think we need to listen. If this evidence is true, we have enabled systemic racism. That is not just a moral crisis, it is a financial one." Naomi cut in, her voice sharp. "The stock already dropped 5% this morning. If Mr. Cole releases all of this evidence, we will lose billions in market value. Customers will turn away. Government partners will reconsider contracts." The room erupted in arguments, voices clashing like a flock of startled birds. One side trying to deny, the other panicking at the vision of collapse. Adrian did not interrupt. He let the chaos unfold before standing, his voice steady and resonant. "You are debating what I might do, but the truth is, I already have." He pressed a button on the remote. The screen lit up with hashtags, #SkySpan. Racism flooding Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. The video of him being forced from seat 2A had already surpassed 10 million views overnight. "This is no longer a secret confined to this boardroom. This is a global crisis, and I am the only one who can help you control it." Langford shot to his feet, growling. You're destroying an airline over one seat." Adrian turned, his eyes like molten steel. "No, Gregory. I am defending millions of passengers, people who pay with real money but are treated as invisible because of the color of their skin. Seat 2A is a symbol, but the real problem is the rotten culture that you are part of." Langford faltered. Eyes around the table turned on him, filled with disdain and suspicion. Richard Halloway, Skyspan's CEO, wiped sweat from his brow, his voice trembling as he tried to hold control. "Mr. Cole, what do you want?" Adrian gestured. Sophia handed out thick packets to each director. On the cover, bold letters read, "Skyspan Reform, the road to equity." "This is what I want," Adrian said clearly. "A full reform program, transparent handling of complaints, an independent committee to address discrimination, mandatory training for every employee, and immediate dismissal of anyone who enables racism, including Langford." The room erupted. Langford's face drained of color. "I am a board member. You have no authority." "Yes, I do," Adrian cut in sharply. "I hold 28%, and the $4.2 billion government contract Aegis just signed, I can pull it if Skyspan fails to prove its commitment to fairness. Let's be clear, who holds the power here?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The directors exchanged looks, fearful, calculating, then slowly shifting toward acceptance. Diane Brooks, the only black director, spoke firmly. I vote in favor of the plan, not just for morality, but because it is the only way to save Sky Span." "Agreed," Patricia Lynn added. One hand rose, then another, then more, as the opposition shrank. Langford slammed the table, shouting, "You're insane! We cannot let him command us!" Adrian strode toward him, his voice icy. "You call this insanity? I call it justice, and justice always wins." Sophia pressed another button. The screen now displayed a recording of Langford's voice from the previous night, whispering to Hayes, "Even rich black men still needin' to learn their place." The room froze in stunned silence. Langford sat paralyzed, his face ashen. Adrian turned back, his tone final. "I will give you 10 minutes to vote. Choose justice and save this airline, or choose privilege and watch Sky Span collapse in the hands of the public." He sat down, fingers interlaced, his expression calm, but razor sharp. The boardroom seemed frozen in time, the ticking of the clock echoing. Outside, Manhattan roared with life. But here on the 42nd floor, the fate of an airline and the dignity of millions of passengers hung in the balance. 10 minutes. That was the time Adrian Cole had given them. But after only 3 minutes, the 42nd floor boardroom was already like a pressure cooker. Some directors whispered nervously, others sat rigid, sweat forming on their foreheads. The ticking of the wall clock dragged louder than any jet engine. Richard Halloway, CEO of Skyspan, swallowed hard, eyes darting around the room. "We must vote." Diane Brooks, the only black director, spoke first. "I support Mr. Cole's reform plan." Her hand rose firmly, without hesitation. Patricia Lynn followed, her voice trembling but resolute. "I agree as well." A third hand, then a fourth, then more rose in succession. The opposition sat frozen, faces drained of color. Edward Mallory, the fiercest opponent, finally ground the words through clenched teeth. "If we don't accept, we lose everything. I agree." Langford erupted, slamming the table. "You cowards! Selling your souls to him over a few videos online?" Adrian turned, his eyes sharp as a blade. "Not because of the videos, Gregory. Because of the truth. And the truth always demands a price." Richard Halloway rose, his voice weary but firm. "The vote is complete. The board accepts Mr. Cole's comprehensive reform plan, effective immediately." The room fell silent, as if all air had been sucked away. Skyspan was no longer the same company it had been yesterday. Adrian slowly stood, stepping into the center, his voice deep and commanding. "Then let us begin with the first step. I demand the immediate termination of crew members Hayes, Benson, and Clark, and the suspension of every manager who buried complaints." At that moment, the boardroom doors opened. 3 familiar faces entered: Captain Edward Hayes, Flight Attendant Carly Benson, and First Officer Owen Clark. They had been summoned urgently, unaware of the board's decision. Hayes carried his usual arrogance, a faint smirk on his lips. "Mr. CEO, I hear we are accused. I want the chance to defend myself." Adrian faced him squarely, his eyes as cold as steel. "You do not need to defend yourself. The evidence speaks for you." Sophia pressed a key. The speakers boomed with Hayes's recorded voice. "Keep the white zone clean. Don't let the wrong people sit there." The words echoed like a hammer blow across the room. Carly Benson turned pale, her lips trembling. Clark lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Richard Halloway cleared his throat, his tone heavy. "Captain Hayes, Ms. Benson, Mr. Clark, by order of the board, you are terminated immediately. Surrender your credentials and leave with security." Hayes froze, eyes wide with disbelief. He growled. "You can't do this. I have contracts. I have the union." Jordan Vance stepped forward, his voice hard as stone. "The union has refused to protect those who violate federal law. You should be more concerned about the FAA investigation coming your way." Security moved in. Hayes roared in protest. Carly broke down in sobs. Clark stumbled as they were escorted out, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Langford leapt to his feet, his face red with fury. "This is a farce! You let an outsider tear down the whole system." Adrian walked toward him, each step pounding like a drumbeat. He stopped, standing taller, his voice low but cutting. "I am not an outsider, Gregory. I am a shareholder. I am a customer. I am the living proof of the truth you tried to bury. And now, you are the one left outside." Langford stumbled back, words caught in his throat. Adrian turned to the board, his voice rising. "From today, Skyspan must change. Not just on paper, but on every flight, every seat, every passenger. There will be no more white zones, no more invisible privileges. We will build an airline of fairness." Diane Brooks nodded, her eyes shining. That is the future. The atmosphere in the room shifted, a blend of resignation and hope. Directors bowed their heads, signing the reform documents. Outside, morning light pierced through the grey clouds, spilling into the boardroom like a sign. Adrian sat, closing his eyes for a brief moment. In his mind, his mother's voice echoed, "Your mind is your greatest asset, but justice is your legacy." And he knew, from this moment on, Seat 2A had transcended a single flight. It had become a symbol. The massive glass doors of Skyspan headquarters swung open. Adrian Cole stepped out with his team. In front of them waited a sea of people. Cameras lined up, microphones crowded forward. Flashes burst like lightning. Reporters' questions crashed like waves. "Mr. Cole, is it true you were removed from your first-class seat? Do you plan to sue Skyspan? What do you want out of this crisis?" The noise was overwhelming, but Adrian stood tall in the chaos. His charcoal suit fit sharp against his frame, his face calm and resolute. He raised his hand, and slowly the crowd fell quiet. "Yesterday," Adrian began, his voice deep and clear, "I was just a passenger. I bought my ticket like everyone else. I chose my seat like everyone else. But because of my skin color, I was treated as someone who did not belong." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lenses zoomed closer, pens scribbled furiously. Seat 2A was not just a seat, he continued. It was a test. And Skyspan failed. They failed to see human worth beyond skin color or privilege. Behind him, Naomi observed quietly. She saw in the eyes of the press a hunger for truth and a shock that carried weight. Sophia noted every reaction. Jordan scanned the crowd with a watchful but proud gaze. They all knew Adrian was turning personal humiliation into a weapon of justice. Adrian paused, letting his words sink deep. Then he lifted his head, his voice strong. "But today, I am not just a passenger. I am a shareholder. I am someone with the power to decide Skyspan's future. And let me be clear, that future will have no place for discrimination. Not ever again." Cheers erupted, applause thundered. Some reporters lost their composure and joined the crowd's excitement. Adrian lifted a thick folder high. "We have just compelled the Skyspan Board of Directors to accept a comprehensive reform plan. The racist crew has been terminated. A transparent complaint system will be implemented. An independent committee will oversee every action. And not only that." He swept his gaze across the sea of cameras. "I am pledging the creation of the Dignity in Transit Foundation, with $50 million of my own wealth as seed capital. This foundation will support any passenger discriminated against on public transport, whether on planes, trains, or buses. No one will ever face this fight alone again." The crowd exploded. Cheers roared down the avenue. Reporters pushed forward, recording every word, every gesture. A CNN journalist shouted, "Mr. Cole, are you only able to do this because you are a billionaire? What about ordinary people?" Adrian looked directly into the camera, his eyes burning. "Yes, I have privileges many do not, and that is exactly why I carry responsibility. If I do not use this power to protect those without a voice, then I do not deserve the title of CEO. Fairness should never be a privilege. It must be the birthright of every human being." His words struck the crowd like a hammer. Some wiped tears. A black woman behind the security line wept openly, whispering, "Finally, finally, someone speaks for us." Inside the glass tower, Langford watched pale, faced, every cheer, every clap cut into his reputation like a knife. No seat 2A could shield him now. Adrian raised his hand to close. "Remember this. Every flight does not just carry people from point A to point B. It carries dignity. And from today, I promise you that dignity will be protected at all costs." The crowd thundered with applause. Chants of "Justice, justice, justice" shook the avenue. Adrian turned and stepped down the stairs. Naomi and Sophia followed close, Jordan clearing a path through the sea of people. Reporters still shouted questions, but he gave no more answers. The message had been delivered, louder than any question could reach. In that moment, Adrian Cole was no longer just the victim of discrimination. He had become a symbol, a light for millions who had been pushed out of their own seat 2A in life. 6 months had passed since the steps of Manhattan shook with Adrian Cole's declaration. 6 months since the moment a stolen seat 2A ignited a firestorm that shook an entire industry. The world of aviation was no longer the same. Skyspan, once arrogant in its brand and privilege, had become the focal point of reform. On business magazines, a new phrase emerged, the Skyspan Standard, a benchmark of fairness and transparency that other airlines were forced to follow or risk losing their customers. That day, Adrian returned once more to O'Hare International. The Chicago sky was clear and blue, as if even the heavens recognized change had come. He walked slowly through the terminal, no longer met with suspicious glances or raised eyebrows, but with nods of respect and smiles of admiration. At the check-in counter, a young Latino employee greeted him brightly. "Welcome, Mr. Cole. Flying 1442 today, right? Seat 2A is ready, and I want to thank you on behalf of all of us." Adrian smiled gently and nodded. In the young man's eyes, he saw himself years ago, a young fighter struggling to be recognized. In first class, the atmosphere was transformed. Gone was the stiff, distant air. A diverse crew of flight attendants welcomed passengers, their uniforms bearing a new badge: dignity for all. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Cole," said a young black male attendant, his voice warm. "It's an honor to serve you today." Adrian answered with eyes full of belief. "The honor is mine, seeing this become reality." He sat in seat 2A. The leather chair, spacious and polished, was familiar, but the feeling now was entirely different. No longer a symbol of exclusion, it had become a symbol of change. Naomi Price, seated behind him, leaned forward and whispered, "We've come so far, Adrian, but I believe this is only the beginning." He nodded lightly. In his mind, the memory of his mother lingered, her calloused hands and her whispered words each night. "Your mind is your greatest asset." Now he understood more deeply. That asset only truly mattered when it became justice for others. The captain's voice filled the speakers. "Good morning, passengers. This is Captain Jessica Ramirez, commanding Flight 1442. We are proud to be the first crew trained under Skyspan's new equity program. Our commitment: every passenger deserves respect." A round of applause spread through the cabin, from first class to economy. The clapping was not for one man, but for a new era. As the plane lifted off, breaking through white clouds, Adrian leaned back and closed his eyes. 6 months ago, he had been forced out of this very seat. Today, he sat in it, not to savor personal victory, but to witness the result of a struggle that had lit hope for millions. In New York, the Dignity in Transit Foundation he founded had already handled over 70 discrimination cases, winning the majority. Its very existence had forced transportation companies to change policies, fearful of becoming the next Skyspan. On television, headlines named Adrian Cole the man who turned a seat into a symbol of justice. The plane climbed higher, sunlight pouring golden through the window. Adrian opened his eyes, gazing into the vast sky. He knew the fight against discrimination was far from over, across industries, across places. But today, at least in the first-class cabin of Skyspan, justice had taken flight. He whispered softly, as if speaking to his mother from afar. "I did it, and I will keep going." Seat 2A, once a mark of humiliation, was now a symbol of pride. A reminder that true power does not lie in privilege, but in the ability to force a system to change. And like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Adrian Cole continued his journey, not just as a CEO, but as a flame carrying justice across the skies. In the world of business, people often believe power lies in money, contracts, or titles of leadership. But the story of Adrian Cole revealed another truth. Real power lies in the ability to turn personal humiliation into collective strength. Seat 2A was never just a first-class seat. It became a symbol of exclusion, then was redefined as a symbol of justice. It reminds us that silent complicity is as dangerous as active discrimination, and it proves that when one person dares to stand, an entire system is forced to change. What Adrian did was not only for himself. He opened a door for millions who had been pushed out of their own Seat 2A in life. He showed us that justice is not a privilege reserved for the powerful. Justice is a fundamental right, and it is also the foundation of lasting prosperity. And what about you? If one day you witness injustice right before your eyes, will you remain silent, or will you speak up? If you believe fairness is not a privilege, but an inherent right for all of us, hit like to spread this message. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories, where justice and dignity are brought into the light. And leave a comment with just one word, justice, to declare that you too are part of this journey. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. Remember this: sometimes a single stolen seat is enough to shake the world, as long as someone dares to rise and reclaim it.